Welcome to the Voice of Creativity podcast. I'm your host, Brennan. Today we hear from one of the investors in my company, Christian Magel. He started many companies all over the globe, all in marketing and advertising and innovation. And now his new venture is spurring innovation at scale. Really, really fun guy to learn from. If you guys like learning from people like this on a weekly basis, please consider giving the channel a like and a subscribe. It really helps it out. Without further ado, here's Christian. Christian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to have that chat with you.
Awesome. I think our audience is going to love it. So you've had quite the global career so far, acting as founder and CMO and various roles in Germany and Australia and most recently the US. So I look forward to diving into all these things and perhaps distilling some insights that you've learned throughout the years. But before we go into what you're doing now and kind of some macro insights, I'd love to go to specifically one thing about your past. One thing that's really unique about your story that I love if you could share with us here is I think if I'm correct, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you had the opportunity to found a company in Germany, grow it, have a pretty awesome outcome, and then kind of try again in a similar format again in Australia and have a second crack at kind of a similar innovation. And so I think that's pretty rare. And I bet most people don't have that opportunity. They kind of have one go of something and either works or it doesn't. And I don't know that people get the opportunity to have a second go at it and kind of distill and learn and optimize. So if you don't mind, I'd love if you could just share a little bit about those companies, if I got that right, and then maybe even go into kind of how the experience of the first time and the second time were different.
Yeah, and frankly, if you'd asked me 30 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you exactly that. I just had a conversation yesterday how sometimes we're surprised the route and the trip our and the way our life comes together. So I'm originally from Germany. I'm a Munich boy, but married internationally to a Boston girl. So that brought me ultimately here to the US. And my background is like I'm a go-to-market guy, and worked in e-commerce and telecommunication and media. So I always had like a big dream in the get-go. My parents weren't super entrepreneur minded, so I always wanted to learn how to build a company, and I was always somehow driven towards an international bit. So now, 25 years later, after university, like I started companies and with some of my co-founders on 3 continents. We expanded those companies into, I think, altogether 11 countries. And that was like such a great learning because we always called it the chocolate cake recipe. You can take the chocolate cake recipe, the 60% or the 70% that are always the same. And wherever you go, you need to learn how to finish the chocolate cake, like the missing 30 to 40%. So
I like that.
so we started Simeo back in 2004, which is like a mobile virtual network operator. But like think of this as like we were the e-commerce guys coming into the space to disrupt telecommunication. And we built something like a Virgin Mobile, but online only in Europe, and became the largest mobile virtual network operator in Europe with like 5 countries. And ramped the business up to about $300 million in sales, but we're a very small team. And it was already interesting to see the difference in the different countries. So we started out in Germany, and then with the partner KPN, we kind of pushed it out into Spain and Netherlands and Belgium and France. And the one thing I think is, in an ideal scenario, always have somebody on your side who understands the culture and can relate to it. Because as much as you think you got the chocolate cake recipe down, it's probably going to look differently. And I'm a marketing guy, and I think your audience is a marketing audience.
That's
I mean,
right.
they know about messaging and how you can have the same product, but you need to alter this to the landscape, to the competition, to what people are used to. So we learned this quite significantly. But what did not change, that was the funny thing, we did not change the mission and the vision. We did not change our value because, we went really like a lot after simplicity, for example, in the telecommunications space, because that was wherever you went, people did not see simplicity and transparency. So that fairness part, that was always the same, and that we could transfer this into the different cultures. And when we went to start so we sold that business to Royal Dutch Telecom, and 5 years later, we decided that we wanted to start that kind of business again with our new partner, Peter, in Australia. So I was with three other co-founders back at the time, and then we started Amazem in 2010. And Amazem became, over the next 5 years, the largest independent mobile operator in Australia. And eventually we IPO'd the company down in Sydney. But there again, totally different landscape again. Like, MVNOs have been around for a long, long time, but nobody really made a difference in the country. So we really did a lot of research and found out, like, what are the things that people would be after. What resonated with people was simplicity, for example, but was also like the fairness approach. But they needed, for example, a different pricing structure because they were used to a monthly payment plan that included everything, rather than the Europeans that did like on a per minute basis. So, and then recruiting the team, always a challenge because you don't know what you get. And we recruited probably very different people in very different environments, but we put our culture front and center, and we made it very entrepreneurial. And that, funny enough, worked out every single time really fantastically.
That's awesome. So just to unpack that, because you dropped some gems already. So the chocolate cake recipe, I love that. So I hadn't realized. I thought there was like, one bite of the apple in Europe and then another in Australia. But actually, it sounds like you had a German opportunity, and then you could take 80% of that, bring it to Spain, and 80% of that, and bring it elsewhere throughout Europe.
We had 6 apples. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so you had actually multiple cakes that you could bake. That's awesome. And then, yeah, it's funny. The other part you totally mentioned that resonated with me is, as you may remember, my background was a marketing agency first that I founded before Cortex. And so one thing we would always tell our mostly US customers was globalization is not Americanization, meaning you can't take the playbook that you have here and copy paste for Europe or Spain or somewhere elsewhere, right? And it sounds obvious, and it felt like you're kind of spoon feeding someone an idea, but that really resonated with people. And I think your version, of course, is not coming from America, so you wouldn't say it that way, but you're effectively saying, or let me ask it as a question: are you effectively saying that if you keep to the mission, you keep the values the same, you standards the same, the kind of spirit of the team the same, you can take that last 20% or whatever, like you said, and customize it, and that's how you can replicate a playbook, even though you're entering effectively, in some cases, probably very different markets. Is that right?
I mean, frankly, it depends a little bit of the category that you're playing in and the industry. So what we're seeing with tech, we have a couple of like European players or Australian players coming in the US, and we talk a little bit about this later in our studio. And what they're seeing is that they might go after a whole different market segment here in the US because they're coming from relationship sales back then. They know the environment, they know how to talk to. And here we come to a market that is probably a bit more transactional. So sometimes you need to, and frankly, sometimes that market has developed over 5 years and has its own rules. And then you need to apply, or you need to find your way how to embrace those existing rules. And, you need to be agile. And you need to be, always on the go. Like, how do I need to adapt my chocolate cake recipe? But what I'm saying is, I guess there's always, and those 60% might be changing depending on what industry you're in and what kind of business you do. However, I think there's always, you need that grain of the core, the why is usually not changing altogether. And I find it also in terms of leadership style. Like, I would come to the US and say, like, what do I have to offer? I'm a German, or, we build business in Australia and coming to America. And what could I offer to the land of opportunity and entrepreneurship? And I found that exactly being different, and we talk about this a little bit later, like exactly being different is already a big point. That if you can get this across, you can build a whole different organization and a successful organization where others think they need to do it a certain way, and you just have a different angle to look at it. And I found that is already a big USP when you come to this country, for example, as an immigrant. On the other hand, if you're as an American go into a different country, you bring something that might be a game changer. Sometimes it's just about identifying it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good kind of like global principle to pull out there. It's like, you could view your lack of subject matter knowledge or lack of domain expertise in the country as a downside. But you could also view, you're bringing something extra that, when I'm looking for an investor or I'm looking for a business partner, you're bringing something that 50 other people I just talked to don't bring, right? So it's cool. I think it's a mindset that people could probably apply to most innovation, right? Like, it's just kind of like when viewing things, you have to look at it, both the positives and the negatives, and kind
Your
of
strength is
dispassionately.
most likely, your biggest strength is most likely your biggest weakness, but your biggest weakness is most likely your biggest strength. So, if you look at it, there's always something in that. I think in a world that is changing so fast, but also where so many things are so professionally developed, and today our team starts, and most likely that there's a chance that 10 other teams go after the same market at the same time. It is really about what is unique about you, what can you bring to the market, and what can you do differently than everybody else. That sets you apart from everybody else. So think in these differentiation, that probably in the 2020s, this is about differentiation. And marketing is pulling this out and getting the messaging right, but also getting the product right.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love that. So that's perfect. Yeah, thank you for going through that. I thought I knew the story, but I learned even more just now. So I'd love to go into more of what you're doing now. So if you could share a little bit about what you're up to these days with the audience, just to catch everyone up, then we can kind of dive into that a little bit more. That would be great.
Yeah, yeah. So I've been with my co-founders for about 16 years in 3 different businesses, and we've been quite successful doing that. 2015, we IPO'd the company, and then we decided all to kind of take a year off. I mean, by that time, we dragged, what were our girlfriends at the time became our wives, and what was like just a partnership, became like a marriage and kids. So we had like all of a sudden 10 kids a couple of years later. So we decided to. Our family decided, like Lisa is here from Boston, we decided here to come over to the US. We always wanted to be here, and I always wanted to work in the US, and it somehow never worked out for different reasons. And in 2017 we came over, and when I came over, I really did a deliberate exercise, took a coach actually, to find out, like, what are really the things that I'm passionate about? What do I want to do? What is my mission? And I came to the point that I feel like I'm a change agent. So I'm pretty good at change, number one. And number two is I like to make a difference. So, and if it's a difference in a good old German way, I want to make a real difference. So it's not like a pretend difference. I want to make a real difference, which is sometimes hard to achieve. Anyway, coming over here, I looked a little bit into the landscape here in Boston, which is an awesome startup ecosystem, as you know, with probably somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 startups in town. Incredible talent, incredible we have about 70 universities, 350,000 students here. So a lot of innovation, MIT, Harvard, and I was like, what could be my place in this? And I wanted to work with early stage startups. I discovered the B2B software sector for me, and away from me, I came here with zero Rolodex, so didn't know anybody. It was literally my real estate broker was probably the first business person on my Rolodex, Steele, and I decided I wanted to open a startup hub. I called it Venture Lane, and Venture Lane started in end of 2018, beginning of 2019. And what we wanted to do, my dad actually was in the hotel business, and I always dreamt of not being in the hotel business, but doing something where people belong. So, and we started Venture Lane, and Venture Lane became a startup hub for early stage B2B software companies. So thinking about differentiation, we wanted to be really very narrow, and we want to be very dedicated, and we wanted to be very thoughtful in how we positioned this. And we wanted to be a support system for early stage founders. So open that up. We had about 20, 25 companies in, all handpicked, and really did a lot of programming. Think of this as like a shared workspace / accelerator light. And we really wanted to make an impact on those companies. Did this while then the pandemic hit about March 2020. You can imagine we had about 10,000 square feet, big office in downtown Boston, because we thought space plays a big role in all of this and events. And then we had to reinvent ourselves. We made our program public. We had about 4,000 people going through that program during the pandemic, helping, again, to our mission that stayed the same, helping entrepreneurs going through difficult times and being a support network. And now, as we're coming out of this, so we have more members and more companies in Venture Lane as a physical space than ever, about 35. We also open our Slack channel and our digital platform. So we have about 1,000 people on there, mostly founders, investors, mentors, where we created like a virtual place for people to come together. And the latest thing is we're just working together with Brian Dennenberg and Ross Pelly, our managing director at Venture Lane. We're opening up a Traction Studio, and the Traction Studio is really helping 7 to 10 companies a year with mostly go-to-market and fundraising challenges. So that could be either a technical founder that has trouble, getting the sales process going, or it could be a team that figured it out but has problem to scale from there. Or the third one is international teams that don't have a presence here and don't know how to do their go-to-market over here. So we're just about in the last weeks of selecting the first batch of companies, 2 to 3. So we'll start before Christmas 2021, and then we'll do this with about 5 or 7 to 10 companies a year, where we help out. Brian is a superb sales leader, as you know. Myself, I'm probably know my stuff with marketing, and we built a terrific network of companies, mentors, about 150 mentors. We built some databases of investors, and also a really great peer network of community that can help out, and you've been such a great part of that too.
Well, thank you. That's so killer. So okay, so a couple things I want to go over. So what was the name? Traction
Studio.
Traction Studio. I love that. That's awesome. Okay, Traction Studio, and it's part of Venture Lane, or is it?
It's going to be part of. It's going to be part of Venture Lane. It's going to be its own unit, but it'll be immersed in what we're doing at Venture Lane anyway. So, true to what we said even before in a different context is, the mission is save the world one entrepreneur at a time. So, but that really is true for the space that we're having. That's true for the program that we're running or the virtual platform that we're having. And that's true for the studio. So as a marketer, I believe that you always need to work down from, if you have like a good roof and a good headliner, something that summarizes what you stand for, it should really apply to all the activities that you do and should guide your doings and your activities.
That's awesome. Yeah, when I kind of zoomed out and looked at your background and then looked at Venture Lane, my kind of like my own summary was that you did your innovation for yourself or kind of like individually at various times, and now you're scaling innovation. But it seems like you even have a bigger mission than that, which is cool. I like that. I thought like
Yeah,
this is how you do like if you've already innovated a bunch, you've kind of succeeded at all these efforts. How do you do it bigger? And it seems like Venture Lane and now Traction Studio are a way to do that at scale. But it seems like, yeah, per your point, there's even a bigger mission there because some of these companies, Cortex in marketing and advertising maybe not included, but a lot of these companies are actually trying to save lives and doing
yeah.
things that really, really, really change the world in like really serious ways. And
And
so
here,
that's
Brendan,
crazy.
there are two things that I'm personally getting really excited about. One is if we see people transform, like founders, like we've been working together with a founder that they go possibly through an acquisition process right now, and through the pandemic, it's a really tough time, and he became a really, really, really good CEO. And it is such a pleasure to just see that person transform and become like the true leader that probably even he or she wouldn't have been possible to make that out before. So that is one thing that drives me. The other thing is we did a count when we had to shut down for the lockdown of COVID. We looked into how many companies actually did anything with healthcare. And I think we had like 22 or 23 companies in. Half of the companies actually pivoted to do something COVID related and pandemic related. So
Wow.
very flexible, very cool. And like, some of them, and you know this too, like company like Minta, for example, now is testing the Olympic team during the Olympic Games in Tokyo, and does many and touches 10,000s, 100,000, millions of lives by doing testing more efficiently than they did before. And if anything, we're proud of being just a little wheel in the big machine. And if we had made one difference or one little difference in the life of those founders or the company, and we enabled them to do something great in the world, that makes us happy and puts a big smile on our face.
Yeah, I love it. And I'd never got, I don't think I made the connection previously. I love that you called out the like hospitality angle, like, your dad's connection, kind of making a place for people. Because I think that's missing too, right? There's the whole like, we work, like all we are is a physical place, but that's not what I think you mean. Right? You mean like a community, almost like a meaningful place to be, I think,
Yeah.
which is
And by
cool.
the way, I recommend whoever is interested in this. There's a great book called The Art of Gathering, and it is very mindful around how you gather, how do you bring people together. And by the way, it's not necessarily always everybody should come. Sometimes it's being specific and being mindful around a group that gets you to the best results, but also makes everybody just a little happier because you're mindful and like who do you invite and what do you do, what you talk about, and what is your focus. So the way we build the community is probably also a way we would be as mindful as building our a company in general.
That's awesome. I'm going to check that out. The Art of Gathering, you said?
The
Is the
art
book?
of gathering. Yeah.
Thank you for that recommendation. That's awesome. And the other thing I want to call out before we move on is you hinted at one of the focuses being growth or kind of product market fit and fundraising, which to me, there's a lot of accelerators and startup-y things a startup can engage with nowadays. But I feel like those two are really the two most important early things that I think, at least, to generalize for most founders, is foreign, right? Oftentimes, at least if I generalize from a lot of the founders that I know, they take something they know, whether it's a academic study or the background, professional background or something. They turn that passion and that knowledge into something, but they don't have the investor network or even early knowledge of safes and convertible notes and all that stuff, and they oftentimes aren't really great at sales, marketing, go to market. So that's really cool that you're not just saying, hey, we're a gathering place, or hey, we're going to build a community through a lot of events. You're saying specifically, we're going to curate the people who come in here. We're going to surround them with good people, and you're going to support them in what I would say are like in maybe not the two top ways, but at least two of the top ways that I think founders can, or maybe like not can fail, but like two of the most intimidating or daunting pieces, right? To somebody
Yeah,
new.
yeah. And frankly, the difference of this year is like, yeah, as you know, a lot of other programs or teams and so on focus a lot of time on fundraising, which frankly is that's cool, that's fine. You got the resources, it buys you time to figure other things out. I mean, we're a little bit old fashioned maybe in this respect. Like we believe that the ultimate test for a company is actually the go to market, so the marketing and sales. Why is that? Because the market will ultimately give you the feedback on, do they pay for the product? Is your team capable to cope with the demands of the market? Once you figure that out, actually, you can fundraise. This is much easier than the other way around. So we believe that a great company these days, and don't get me wrong, you still need a product and you need to still going. The fact is, in the last 20 years, it's much easier to build your product to a point where you have an MVP and where you go out and you can take some money for it. So that has probably changed. Now you have 10 other teams doing the same thing. And the really important thing here is, if you get traction and if you get, you go to market straight, that is a great indicator that you have probably attracted the right team, that you have at least a first good idea of what the product is, and that you probably the money will follow, and you're doing something right. So we believe that go to market is actually the one leading indicator for startup success, and therefore we will fully focused on it to a point. Maybe you don't even need fundraising because you're building a bootstrap business and you don't even need to take any of that.
Yeah, I've I've been on both sides of that fundraising, bootstrap the first one, fundraising the second one, and I think the grass is always greener. but but yeah, I love the fact that you're not. It sounds like you're not biased, right? It seems like if you meet a good founding team with a cool vision that you love, and they're more on the lean startup side, not going to go raise $100 million. You're not. It sounds like you're open to that, which is important. I think.
We want to push repeatability and scalability, and once you have that and you discovered that, and obviously you've got to talk to many potential customers and many outside sources to kind of get that validation and that product market fit. But we think to get there, and possibly earlier than without the help, or to get there at all, is the true value in these days within if you build a startup company these days.
That's cool. So to bring this one step, zoom out maybe, right, into some sort of principles. When you've selected, you've worked on a lot of companies yourself, and then because of Ventureland and now the new endeavor, you're in a position where you're kind of evaluating a lot of different innovation, right? And as you kind of hinted at, there's kind of medical stuff, there's MarTech stuff, there's kind of stuff across the board. Are there any frameworks you use to kind of evaluate ideas, or you kind of just hinted at one thing that's important? You said, if something has some market feedback, that's good, and kind of like one of the key indicators, and I agree. But are there other ways you kind of just evaluate? Because it seems like it'd be a hard thing to say this company that's helping doctors combat burnout by making hospitals more efficient is better or worse to work with than this company that's mining, has a new technology for mining, or something, right? These are so different that I feel like I'd have a hard time making that call. So is there a way you kind of do that, or is it mostly kind of like gut instinct?
So there's two answers to this. So standard, I guess, is always this is a place, as you know, where the the possibility that you will pivot at some point and your original idea is maybe not even existent anymore or only a fraction of this. So it always comes down to the founders and the founder dynamic. I find, like, is this team possible? Is this team able to deal with fast changes in like no time? Can they make decisions and all of that? So this is probably the standard answer that we will get from an investor, that you will always look into the head of the organization, the team that's driving this. And I could not imagine, like, maybe very rarely is you have a great founder team and a really shitty team. So it usually comes like that. Obviously, there's a bunch of other things, like, which market are you in? Is the timing right? How big is the market and the opportunity? We are always looking in kind of traction that you have already. First traction is, think of this as the built-in research, from a marketing perspective, the whole organization getting feedback from customers, whether they are able or willing to pay for something. And there's so many things from A to Z that get evaluated by a customer, and for them to stay on and pay the price. Now, another structure that I actually like is the De Bono PMI model. And so De Bono put this out to evaluate after a brainstorm. If you have like 10 ideas, for example, and you want to find out which of those ideas you should follow. And this construct has been around for a long time, and we adapted it a little bit to the startup world. So PMI is more or less, you take an idea, could be a business, could be a general business idea, and you sort out what are the pluses about this, what is all the stuff that we like. And then many times, and depending on the environment, like, you have like a lot of minuses in there, or at least concerns, right? So put those down. And then the third one is, you actually take the minuses and put them into another category, which is I for interesting. And the idea is how to turn those minuses around. Let's say you're going after a market and you're concerned that you have competition, and that is a minus. But you find out that competition has been around for a long time, and they're not able to be very flexible because they have a lot of like legacy customers, for example. So the I could be, hey, maybe we're the smallest one here, but we're definitely the fastest. And to put this out, this feature or this product, they will not be able to follow, because if they did, they would cannibalize, for example, their current customer base. So, and in terms of evaluation of the customer, I'm not looking for ideas, and we're not looking for ideas that just get pluses and it's so obvious. There is absolutely not a single business model out there that has no minus. Now, the really interesting part is, how do you turn around the minus into possibly a plus? As we talked before, your biggest strength might be your biggest weaknesses, and your biggest weaknesses might be your biggest strength. And this is the real jam, this is the gold nugget. If you find a way that is so obviously possibly negative or a minus, and you can turn it around in a very innovative and interesting and creative way, then you're up to something. This is the opportunity. If you hone into this, you probably have something that others can copy, at least in the short term, or for quite some time, or not in the same way that you can do. And you can make it your unfair advantage. And that is the gold, because that is making you really different. The market is maybe great and all that, but you have a bunch of other competitors. How do you make it really different? So I found that I really makes the difference in, wow, that makes you different right now, maybe for the next year or two. And that is really worth looking into. And that is why we're choosing you and working with you.
That's super cool. I only knew it kind of top level concept, and I thought it was basically like a SWOT analysis, like strengths and weaknesses and whatever. But actually, I like that. It's the I part is the magic part there, right? Turning the M's into P's, basically, right? To
Yes.
PMI framework. That's cool. And yeah, I can see your point. I think Debano has another framework, the six hats. Have you familiar with that as well?
Heard of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's quite similar, and I think it's, like I said, I think it's by the same group, but
Yeah.
basically the
And
same
and
idea
it
is like,
sometimes it helps you getting unstuck, right? So sometimes like, God, like how are we doing this? And I find to get unstuck and find new ways to approach it super helpful. Yeah.
yeah, all that, like, I don't know, metacognition stuff, like thinking about thinking. I think even just being able to apply any framework, right, and take a step back and say, take yourself out of the emotion and the kind of the same kind of actions you've been doing, right? Like, is no matter how innovative and intellectually flexible you are, I think there's a lot of inertia, right? You kind of get into your habits, you do what you do, and I think things like that are really helpful. And I've never employed PMI before, but I'm going to try that. Is this the kind
Yeah.
of thing where you can apply? It seems like you can apply it like on our next marketing campaign. You could kind of
To
figure out.
everything.
Okay, yeah, so
Frankly,
it seems like
to
any
everything.
size concept you could.
Think of it as a creative way of turning around concerns and minuses. And frankly, by the way, you might have 10 ideas, and for 7 of those, you might not find a good turnaround of it. The M might be so negative. Let's say you have a competitor and that competitor has $1 billion and they just can crush you. Maybe then you find out maybe that's not the way to go. But it's about the creative ways to think around the corner and in a different framework that helps me. And you can literally I use this methodology in every part of my life. Actually, if I see like, okay, I can't do something, say yes anyway, and this is a way to figure it out how to do it anyway.
True entrepreneur right there. That's what that. So it looks like. Say yes, figure it out after. Yeah, I think that's a character trait that's very useful. That's cool. So okay, so that's really helpful, and I think we've already distilled quite a few takeaways. So I think to wrap things up, I'd love to just hear about, if you're okay sharing, where can the Venture Lane story go? Do you have you just gave us like the next step, so that maybe it's asking a lot to ask for future steps. But it seems like if you really nail community and innovation, like you're talking about, and then supporting community innovation, you're really talking about scaling innovation effectively. And it seems like that could get pretty big. Have you thought about that? And do you have like a even bigger vision that we haven't heard about yet?
Yeah, maybe differently. Like I was lucky enough to be part of businesses that scale to quite significant companies. At that stage, world domination is not one of my personal wishes anymore. So I actually believe that there is some magic in doing something deliberately small and focused. Now, what I love is what's coming out of that are a bunch of learnings, and you can probably take those learnings and use other channels, be it a book, be it a podcast, what you're doing here, or other ways, or do workshops in general to help out. And that is we're already working with a bunch of people who are interested to do this. I think it always comes down to you want the integrity to have this in good hands of an entrepreneur and not just scale it. And we've seen this sometimes with other accelerators, and like now they're like doing hundreds and hundreds of companies. And I think, frankly, this is maybe the right business model, but it's not fair and it's not the right thing. It's not mindfulness around the companies or the founders that you're working with. However, the one thing, like, we want to get this right. We might scale it a little bit to a couple more companies, but we also, the fund is in the making. But one thing that I'm very passionate about and will definitely approach is how can you take this knowledge that is right now in the startup and tech phase, and how can you make it available to underprivileged founders and entrepreneurs, people that are not in tech, but just care about building a company so that they can feed their families. How can you make this accessible to kids that are in neighborhoods and in schools, and they give them some tools in the hands to make good decisions later on in their life? So that is something I think where we would love to kind of instill that idea and the process with kids, be it with people of color, be it with anybody who has probably not the chance to, or things that they have the ability to start a company and raise money and be $100 million or $1 billion company, but do something that is, go to market, the right product, customer centricity, leadership. All these things apply to so many things. In that respect, we think that entrepreneurship as such can solve so many problems and challenges in many other ways. So I'm looking forward to actually looking more in depth into that, because I think that could be very, very meaningful.
I love that. If you guys haven't already, you should connect with the guys at Stripe, the founders of Stripe. I know, for people who don't know, the payment processor, right? They, from what I've heard them speak about, I don't know exactly how deep they are or where they are on the path, but it seems like they have this cool vision that, in the past, it's been kind of like very heavily US centric, and even within the US, specific to specific cities. Some city, if you're physically located in one city, it's much easier to start a company because there's just more infrastructure. And their point is, because of COVID and because of various things, no code things, and all these things are coming together, basically make it where internationally, previously some person in some country, like one of the founders, or maybe both the founders of Stripe, are from like a small place in Ireland, right? And their point was like, if I hadn't moved to Silicon Valley, I couldn't have started this company, and that's like a needless barrier. And it seems like nowadays, actually, like, especially if you can do what you're talking about, like take the knowledge that you've gained in a Boston or a San Francisco or whatever and share it. It seems like that, coupled with technologies that kind of enable people to start companies easier, kind of like, Shopify, kind of at the drop of a hat. Seems like there's a world here where basically anybody, anywhere, we're not there yet, but we can envision a world not too far in the future where anybody anywhere can kind of take their own future in their hands. That's really awesome. I love that.
Save the world, one entrepreneur at a time. Yeah,
it's back to the vision. Okay, I finally get it after an hour of talking. I love it. Well, thank you, Christian. This has been amazing. I think people are going to love all these takeaways. You
thanks
a lot of
for having me, Brendan.
This is awesome. Once things launch and you have more to talk about, open invitation. Come back on anytime.
Awesome. Would love to. And yeah, hope that was helpful. And if there's any way you want to get in touch with me, LinkedIn or Twitter, Christian Magel from Venture Lane here in Boston, or just stop by for a coffee. We're right next to the government center.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll put all the links to your social and everything in the show notes, so anyone can click below and get those. But awesome. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks so much, Brendan.
So if you enjoyed that podcast, if you like creativity and topics like that, or if you work in a creative field, you'll definitely love the IAA, the International Advertising Association. You should check them out at iaaglobal.org. The IAA is one of the oldest running, since 1938, associations for creative professionals, and it's currently acting as the global compass, sharing information like this, gathering cool minds like you've just seen to chat. And to understand exactly what's happening today. So I encourage you to go check them out, iaaglobal.org.